Chapter 8. Cross Country. They were well rested and well fed, and they soon reached a pond where they could drink. Their achiever had told them to be on the lookout for it. It would not have been safe for them to drink from his bowl again. Too many humans were now about, and their spirits were far higher than when they had left the house in Regent's Park. How far away it already seemed, although it was less than 24 hours since they had been in their baskets by the kitchen fire. Of course they were still anxious about their puppies, and sorry for the poor dearlies. But Lucky's message had been cheering, and they hoped to make it all up to the dearlies one day. And anyway, as Pongo said, rain would help nobody, while enjoying the freedom to race across the fields would do them a power of good. He was relieved to see how well Mrs. ran and what good condition she was in. So much food had been given to her while she was feeding the puppies that she had never got pitifully thin, as Perdita had when she had fed her own puppies without being given extra food. "You are a beautiful dog, Mrs.," said Pongo. "I am very proud of you." At this, Mrs. looked even more beautiful, and Pongo felt even prouder of her. After a minute or so, he said, "Do you think I'm looking pretty fit?" Mrs. told him he looked magnificent, and wished she had said so without being asked. He was not a vain dog, but every husband likes to know that his wife admires him. They ran on, shoulder to shoulder, a perfectly matched couple. The night was windless, and therefore seemed warmer than the night before, but Pongo knew there was a heavy frost, and when, after a couple hours across the fields, they came to another pond, there was a film of ice over it. They broke this easily and drank, but Pongo began to be a little anxious about where they would be by daybreak, for they would need good shelter in such cold weather. As they were now traveling across country, he thought it unlikely they would find the village that had been expecting them, but he felt sure most dogs would by now have heard of them and would be willing to help. "Only we must be near some village by dawn, or we shall meet no dogs," he thought. Soon after that a lane crossed the fields, and, as they had just heard a church clock strike midnight, Pongo felt there was now little chance of their meeting any humans on the road. He wanted to find a signpost and make sure they were traveling in the right direction. So they went along the lane for a mile until they came to a sleeping village. There was a signpost on the green, which Pongo read by the light of the moon. He was very good at reading, as a pup he had played with alphabet blocks. All was well. Their journey across the fields had saved them many miles, and they were now deep in Essex. The village where they might have stayed was already behind them. By going north, they would reach Suffolk. The only depressing thing was that the wonderful steak dinner seemed such a long time ago, and there was no hope of getting food as late as this. They just had to go on and on through the night, getting hungrier and hungrier. And by the time it began to get light, they were also extremely chilly, partly because they were hungry and tired, and partly because it was getting colder and colder. The ice on the ponds that passed was thicker and thicker. At last they came to a pond where they could not break through to drink. And now Pongo was really anxious, for they had reached the part of the country where there seemed to be very few villages. Where could they get food and shelter? Where could they hide and sleep during the bitterly cold day ahead of them? He did not tell Mrs. of his fears, and she would not even admit that she was hungry. Her tail drooped and her pace got slower and slower. He felt terrible, tired, hungry, anxious, and deeply ashamed that he was letting his beautiful wife suffer hardship. Surely there would be a village soon, or a fair-sized farm. "Should we rest a little now, Pongo?" said Mrs. at last. "Not until we found some dogs to help us, Mrs.," said Pongo. Then his heart gave a glad leap. Ahead of them were some thatched cottages. It was fully daylight now, and he could see smoke twisting up from several chimneys. Surely some dog would be about. "If anyone tries to catch us, we must take to the fields and run," said Pongo. "Yes, Pongo," said Mrs., though she did not now feel she could run very far. They reached the first cottage. Pongo gave a low bark. No dog answered it. They went on and soon saw that this was not a real village, but just a short row of cottages, some of them empty and almost in ruins. Except for smoke rising from a few chimneys, there was no sign of life until they came to the very last cottage. As they reached it, a little boy looked out of a window. He saw them and quickly opened the cottage door. In his hand was a thick slab of bread and butter. He appeared to be holding it out to them. "Gently, Pongo," said Mrs., "or you shall frighten him." They went through the open gate and up the cobbled path, wagging their tails and looking with love at the little boy, and the bread and butter. The child smiled at them fearlessly and waved the bread and butter. And then, when they were only 3 or 4 yards away, he stooped, picked up a stone, and flung it with all his force. He gave a squeal of laughter when he saw the stone strike Pongo, then went and slammed the door. At that moment, the dog heard Rand's voice inside the cottage. They turned and ran as fast as they could along the road and then into a field. "Are you hurt, Pongo?" cried Mrs. as they ran. Then she saw that he was limping. They stopped behind a haystack. Pongo's leg was bleeding, The stone must have had a very sharp edge. But what hurt him most was a bruise on the bone. He was trembling with pain and rage. Mrs. was terrified, but she did not let him see this. She looked at his wound and said there was nothing a good rest would not cure. "Rest? Where?" said Pongo. Mrs. saw that the haystack was very loosely made. She scrabbled at it fiercely, saying, "Look, Pongo, you can creep in and get warm. Then sleep for a while, and we'll find us some food. I will! I will! The first dog I meet will help me." By now she had made a large hole in the haystack. Pongo looked at it longingly. But no, he could not let her go alone. He struggled to his feet, wincing with pain, and said, "I must come with you to find food, and I will bite that child." "No, Pongo, no!" cried Mrs., horrified. "Remember, he is only a very young human. All very young creatures are ignorantly cruel. Often our dear puppies hurt me badly, not knowing they were doing so. To bite a human is the greatest crime a dog can commit. You should not let that cruel, thoughtless child put such a sin on your conscience. Your pain and anger will pass, but the guilt would remain with you for always." Pongo knew she was right, and already the desire to bite the child was passing. "But I won't let you go alone," he said.